Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, January 31st, 2025. An entire month is in the books. David, good to see you. Our roving correspondent and colleague Josh is somewhere either in a Gulf Stream or Bombardier. We don't quite know where yet, David, but she'll show up. For everyone in the audience on LinkedIn Live and YouTube and X, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got comments or questions for David or I, please put them in the chat. We're happy to address it. And before we begin, our usual disclaimers. Obviously, everything we're discussing should not be considered any type of financial or investment advice. And anything we're talking about really represent David and Josh and mine's personal opinion, not necessarily the opinion of our respective firms. David, a month is in the books. It's been a busy month between executive orders and crypto news all over the place. We've got lots to cover. Let's kick it off with what you've seen in the week. One of the things you and I have been chatting about and going right to markets news is liquidity. And you mentioned, you texted me the other day about Bitcoin kind of eating up all of the liquidity in the marketplace. What are you seeing as far as liquidity and funds flow?
You know, we're really just seeing a lot of liquidity going into Bitcoin itself and not really a follow through to either of the other tokens or the altcoins.
Yeah.
So, you know, here we are at the end of the month and Bitcoin's going to close unless something strange happens, you know, hopefully in that 105, 106 range, maybe 104, which is a good monthly close, but a lot of the altcoins are really down significantly. And, you know, one thing we saw is that we saw a presidential token get launched and a lot of the liquidity from other meme coins get taken out of that and into that token. So we're not really seeing new money or liquidity go to work in some of the alts and the meme coins. It's just kind of moving from one to the other.
Yeah. David, you know, let's dive into that as well. I think we touched on it last week. You know, President Trump issued a token and then the First Lady issued a token. You know, we had one of our networking cocktail receptions in New York City yesterday evening. David, you were missed, but it was certainly a topic of conversation. And the question really becomes why? Politics aside, what was the reason for that? And is, you know, you've often said social tokens, right? Is this kind of the very early days of that type of conversation?
Well, I can't really speak to the Trump token, but in the general sense, look, I'm a believer in these ideas of having social tokens and networks and benefits for people whom you follow. But I mean, that it's a thing that will happen over time.
Yeah. And
look, you know, everybody has a right, I guess, to have a meme coin if they want, until otherwise. Although interestingly enough, Pump Fund was sued today in a class action lawsuit.
Oh, interesting. I didn't see that.
I just saw it a few minutes ago from CoinDesk, and basically they are, you know, going after them as platforming all of these securities, and because they receive fees for doing that. You know, again, it's in its nascent stage, and you know, at some point, people have to have a buyer beware kind of view of things. I mean, we do want customer protections, but ultimately, if you're on Pump Fund buying a meme coin and it doesn't go in the direction you want, really need to look in the mirror and not go pointing fingers at other people trying to get insurance on your purchase.
Yeah, David, it's interesting when we look at all of these kind of, let's call them the pumps and dumps that many people think that they are. One of the fears I always have is, are we looking at another mania that's going to blow up in a pretty ugly way? I mean, there are still a significant number of people. Let's not call it a significant number of people. There's still a percentage of people who look at it as get rich quick, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of minimizes the value of crypto very broadly, kind of minimizes the idea of what a social token might be in some type of future. How does that get prevented in your mind? Are we looking at another wave of regulation?
Well, you know, my thought is that these, you know, I think the view is that these aren't securities. Mm-hmm. But I think instead of, obviously this is not something that's really additive in its current form.
Yeah.
I think in a future form where there is more of a social component to it and real tangible benefits, I think there'll be more of that.
Yeah.
But look, if you're going to buy these things, you know, you should really go in eyes wide open that they could go to zero.
Right.
And if you really think otherwise,
this is not investment advice.
No, it's not investment advice. And look, Some of them do really well, and you see these people post on X, oh, I got in early and I did 120X on these. For every one of those posts, there's probably 50 who,
Yeah.
bought some and it went to zero. So I think people really have to be mindful of what they're investing in.
Yeah. And David, look, you've said it often, and the wise words, right? Buyer beware.
Yeah.
And I also think there's I don't want to use the phrase generational anymore, but I feel like there's a lot of different market pieces that are moving. You've seen the news, and we've been talking about AI and now agentic AI. We really are at the very beginning still, I would argue, of that Web3 integration with leveraging tokens in ways that I honestly don't think we've thought about yet, but I still think there's a long-term possibility of leveraging crypto in the Web3 environment because of AI. Do you agree with that kind of thesis?
I do. I mean, I'm fascinated by this AI agents, and when I have a little free time, I would like to play with them and see what I could do with them. And
Right.
so look, I think there's a lot of innovation. Crypto is really right in the center of it. But look, if you're going to buy, there's a Solana token, a dog with hat,
Along with that.
And look, it's a cute meme, but what are you buying, and I'm not picking on it by any stretch, but if you're putting meaningful money in that, and you're not really getting anything, you just have to decide, are you willing to take that risk of maybe it goes somewhere, and
Yeah.
But otherwise, you can't really, in my mind, these people really should not be going somewhere and complaining that they lost money on these things.
Yeah, look, again, it's some people see it as a get rich quick scheme. Some people are experimenting. I think there's some level of people and try and understand, what do these tokens do? How do I get involved? And to me, it's the same conversation with DeFi. I still think let's kind of take that tangent a little bit, David. You and I've seen the articles about DeFi, and we're working on a webinar sometime later in February on institutional engagement in DeFi.
Yep.
You've seen the news and the information and those conversations that are happening. How hard is it to mount that wall of concern about things like DeFi for institutions? Does that happen in the near future?
Well, look, I think everyone agrees that the ability to use DeFi in a way where you can swap one token for another is very appealing.
Yeah.
So what it really comes down to is, can institutions find a way to work within DeFi where, from their perspective, the KYC is sufficient for them to do that? And I think for others, it's not and I'm not talking about the protocols that run it, but like individuals, I don't think, the typical crypto person is not going to skip using a DeFi protocol they like because there's KYC on it or not. It's really an institutional issue of making sure that they're trading with parties that have been vetted. But ultimately, look, I think there's a world where we have traditional DeFi platforms, and then we have ones that are more closed to people who sort of are vetted and then who go through the ecosystem. So I think there's being an option.
Yeah, and look, there's precedent for that. It may not be the best match per se, but things like loyalty and reward points are kind of walled gardens that people use within different organizations, and I can imagine that level of walled garden for some types of protocols and capabilities. I think there's arguably there's an interoperability conversation that we need to have, but I think again it's very early days for DeFi. I think it's very early days for this idea of social tokens, which brings me to kind of market action, David. I've got to ask about it. We talked about it, in the virtual green room a little bit, and all joking aside, the mechanics of why Bitcoin can't hold a bid at 105,000 for very long, or when you look at Ethereum, what is driving the market dynamics of some of the most liquid tokens in your mind?
Look, I think everybody also needs to have a little perspective when it comes to Bitcoin. We've come a long way over the past few months.
Yeah.
And sort of mulling the fact that we, are trading between 90 and 104 and 106 for a period of time. Mm-hmm. Maybe some consolidation is really not that big of a deal in the greater scheme of things. I know everybody wants up and to the right or a number go up. And Ron,
doesn't work that way.
Yes, and you still haven't hit your 125 for the bet.
I'm still smarting from that, and we will get the steak dinner out, David. I know you're going to be in New York sometime in February, and we will cut you loose in the steakhouse world.
But I do think we need a little perspective. Like we are, moving forward, things are progressing. The amount of crypto and Bitcoin in particular that are being bought compared to how much is being mined right now is, I think some multiple is being bought of what's being mined.
Right.
So I think what you're really seeing is, legacy holders are selling at this 100 level, this 100K level, and then maybe some other people. I think we talked about a few podcasts ago that are around 100K. Some people who bought last year would have a double.
Right.
So I think we're seeing that play out where a number of parties are seeing a 2x and are taking some profits off the table. So I think
I agree with you. Like, there's not going to be a world where someone's not taking profits at 100,000 per Bitcoin. It just makes absolute sense. The other dynamic of that, David, when we talk about inflows, I think, and I could be misstating this, tell me if you agree or disagree. For a long time, the market for things like Bitcoin were, I'll broadly call it, pretty retail oriented, minus the MicroStrategies of the world, minus some of the other larger firms. But now with buy-sides coming in more deeply, with liquid ETFs, with accounting changes that let real companies hold Bitcoin and recognize the appreciated value, those companies may not move fast, but they move in size, and you can anticipate some upscale as they become more comfortable with Bitcoin on the balance sheet. David, what's the upside in your mind? And again, not a price prediction, but what's a support level beyond 100 for BTC?
Well, look, I think we have this interesting dynamic where we have a lot of corporates who are now buying.
Right.
We have a number of states buying to have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, or states having strategic reserves. And we saw that the Czech Republic is evaluating whether they want to own Bitcoin for their strategic reserves. So I really think corporates are driving this more than retail. I think retail is driving, some of the ETF purchases, but we have to remember that there's a lot of the well-funded retail who can't buy any of the ETFs or spot crypto on their platforms.
Right.
So, I think you have that. I think you also have some people that didn't have the best experiences with some of the, brokers, the BlockFis of the world and FTXs of the world, and maybe have just been on the sidelines. They took their lumps a little bit, less with FTX, but meaningfully with BlockFi, and maybe they're just on the sideline right now. I think unfortunately retail will come in last, and that we'll tend to see the highs for this cycle when retail comes in. But hopefully, they're streaming in slowly.
David, it's interesting. As we talk about this, I agree with you. I think the retail will come in last, and I have a living example. I have some elderly family members that've got a financial planner, or they've got an RIA that, whatever this person is, and comes in on some regular basis and talks to them about their portfolio and all that stuff. And they had asked about Bitcoin. Now, mind you, these are senior citizens who have only heard about Bitcoin because of me or something bad in the news. And their RIA basically said, you don't need any of that. These family members are like, well, we want exposure. And their investment advisor's response was, well, I'll look into some IRA, some ETFs for you, and I'll get back to you. But that kind of reticence to even meet the needs of some customers that, respectfully, they have a little bit of means, they want to allocate some small portion to it. And the answer was, yeah, don't bother, because they don't understand or they don't want to. Have you seen that?
I have. I think of that Larry David ad from a couple of years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. Should I get some exposure? Yeah, I don't think so.
Yep.
Exactly. So I think, I think of that a lot. Look, it's not for everybody. I do think that, people would benefit from having it in their portfolios, but it's up to their portfolio managers. And, to me right now, Ethereum feels like the undervalued play here. We are seeing some buying. I think there's more shorting of Ethereum than I think of the other, than Bitcoin, maybe on a percentage basis. But I also think that, until they fix the staking element for the ETFs, for the Ethereum ETFs, you are losing, a valuable stream of income that you would get from the staking piece. And I'm hopeful that will get resolved.
Yeah.
So I think, look, we just need to have some perspective. We're at like 104, 105. We've come a long way. Things consolidate. And I really think that February is going to be a strong month, and we could see, a rally both in Bitcoin and Ethereum this month.
David, let's go back to the Ethereum for a moment, because I think you and I are having this kind of ongoing conversation. I've had this yesterday with some colleagues in New York City. Is there something fundamentally more at stake for Ethereum? And the reason I bring that up is we're hearing about a lot of token offerings and a lot of organizations leveraging Solana, for example, as an
Yeah.
L1 for a variety of different reasons, which we won't go into, everything from cost to throughput to processing capability. Are you worried in the long term about Ethereum, or do you think the thesis still holds?
I'm very comfortable with Ethereum. Look, there aren't only going to be two blockchains at the end of the day. There are going to be a number of very large ones, and there'll be smaller ones that serve more niche purposes. So
Yeah.
I'm not worried. I mean, I think, maybe sometimes the messaging is imperfect. I think everybody thinks of Vitalik as the face of Ethereum, and
Yeah.
he's done so much for the industry, but maybe there can be just more consistent messaging and like timelines and things like that that are more available to people so they could read it and understand it ideally. Because sometimes you
Yeah.
read some of those things and you're like, I'll have a little caffeine before I try and read that again. But
Yeah.
I think this is where you have these decentralized protocols, and they're very meaningful in the ecosystem. But because they're decentralized, it's not like there's somebody coming on CNBC every quarter and talking about them. So it's just a
Right.
different paradigm we have.
Yeah.
So I think I do think that as more people get access to Ethereum ETFs, and as the ETFs get fixed at some point, which I hope they will this year, I mean, I definitely see, because I think ETH is still like, a third below its all-time high.
Right.
Like at 3,400, ETH tipped off around 5,000. So
Yeah.
we've seen this, really accumulation in Bitcoin mostly in this rally so far. And so I think there's an expectation at some point we are going to see Ethereum and the altcoins, but not all altcoins, because there's just a proliferation of them now.
Yeah.
Some of the major ones, I think, will see some important appreciation.
David, let's go a little off script on that as well, because as we talk about price action, we talk about utilization and flows into the crypto space, and there's I lost count of how many different cryptos there are now. But do you feel that when we look at the regulatory issues that are still overhanging, the multiple court cases that are out there, this presumption that under a new administration, the SEC will move away from regulation by enforcement per se, and that even some of these cases might go away, do you feel that that's kind of a restraint on market action as well? And the reason I bring this up is you and I were half joking about the news the other day on XRP,
Yeah.
the case being quote unquote removed from the SEC website, and this kind of flurry of social media activity like, oh, the SEC dropped the case. And that's not the case. It moved to a different court or a different district. David, you know better than I. Is regulatory overhang holding the market back as well?
Well, look, I think everybody's kind of waiting to see what the landscape looks like, but we have a really good idea now with, Chairperson Uyeda's, group that he's forming. We have an ally in Hester Pierce.
Yep.
Scott Besson is an ally. And then at some point we'll have, Atkins approved as, SEC chair.
Yep.
Look, I think people have been, avoiding the US for a period of time. And so I think it just takes some time to course correct.
Yeah.
But having SAB 121, removed is a big help. So I think all the incremental steps are there. And I think it's another thing that, in crypto, a month is a year, but sometimes you actually need the 3 to 6 months in real time and in traditional time, just to let these things flow through and let some of these changes get made.
Right. Right. David, it's interesting. You and I often have, and Josh has now joined those conversations, as we pivot to the macro conversation. I know you and I eagerly look at all of the data that comes out and then shake our heads because the data is either revised or wrong. But personal consumption expenditures came out today. This idea that most of the data that I had seen reported seems to match, market estimates. I think PCE was up 0.2%, which was in line. And when we talk about crypto as a risk on asset class generally, if we're looking at a potential March rate cut, is part of the macro conversation what drives new prices highs as well?
I mean, I think the biggest catalyst right now for us is that at some point these wirehouses, and hopefully it's in this next quarter, turn on individuals, in their accounts and have access to them. So the Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBSs of the world, and I think that will unload a fair amount of liquidity. The SAB 121 removal will also do that. I think we're just going to see constant movement in in these protocols, and I think they're just going to continue developing. And then, from a macro level, I think we'll see. I'm not sure if I think we'll have a rate cut in March. I mean, I think President Trump would like several rate cuts, but I think barring something really majorly unforeseen, it feels like things are under control. We'd like to see inflation lower, but I think everybody would. But well, what do you think? What are you seeing, Ron, on that?
Yeah, I think everyone wants to see the core inflation things that affect folks that are lower on the economic ladder. Food, fuel, for example, not as high as they were, but are still elevated. Housing, still elevated. So there is a drag to people who have to buy those things and are lower down on the income scale. But overall, when you look at the market, it's a pretty solid market. From a jobs perspective, from a CapEx perspective. So I feel like I'm not sure how much more the Fed can do without stoking either inflation or fear. So I agree with you. I'm not sure that a March rate cut makes sense. You and I are not there. We don't see the data they see. Particularly, it just, the other aspect of it that I always find a little bit frightening is the politicization of the Fed. And, whatever your political affiliations are, it's probably not great to try to pressure our central bank to lower interest rates. You and I know the history of it. Inflation can come back, and it can come back really fast. So I'm always a little concerned about that. But I agree. Again, we're early in the new year. I think it'll be interesting to see what the rollouts are across different markets. The other thing, and we talked a little bit about this as well, David, let's pivot to this. What's the tie-in between AI and crypto, or broadly innovation in crypto in this space? It makes me wonder, what does Web3 look like?
Well, I think one thing that's really interesting is that, you had this, AI product come out of China and allege that they were able to do these searches and functionality much cheaper. And I don't think we know quite sure if that's the truth or not. I think that's up for debate. But you saw how much of a chunk it took out of like NVIDIA and some of our big tech stocks. And crypto, I think, sold off somewhat from that, but it kind of rebounded. And I think everything rebounded after a few days. So, but it's interesting. If you see a negative tech narrative in the space, it tends to be affecting crypto as well. So you're seeing some correlation there. I do want to pivot, Ron, because, I was thinking about Chairman Powell speaking the other day. And I think that some of the comments he made regarding banks and banking crypto, even though he did it in his low-key way that he, does it, were really important for the space. Because, I mean, you can't imagine him saying this last year if we had gone back 6 months. So we really have seen a seed change where we're not having choke point 2.0, where we might even have some investigations into who, how it was handled. And, Coinbase has been saying that the FDIC has not been providing all the documents they've been expecting, and requesting. So I think even though it was done in a low-key way, let's not underestimate the fact that this choke point 2.0 doesn't exist, and that we don't have SAB 121 anymore, and that Chair Powell is saying that, he doesn't see why banks, can't deal with and handle Bitcoin, and it will no longer be a liability on our balance sheet.
David, to the point you make, and you and I have had this conversation for years, we would never have heard those words out of the central bank's mouth in the past couple, 2 years ago, for example. Certainly not 5 years ago. So you're right. It's hard to remember the progress that's being made as it's happening, but we've certainly come a very, very long way. David, we've only got a few minutes left. I know also that you ingest quite a bit of data. I haven't looked at the options market a bit, and the reason I ask about it is twofold. One is you and I always, you in particular, look at the options market for crypto and kind of get a picture for where money's being allocated as some of the options. But I'm also thinking about things like, overall market data and how that might impact where crypto is going. Have you seen options price movement? What do you think about the long-term yields? Is there a correlation from a macro perspective?
At the end of this month, I really focus a lot on what Chair Powell was saying and thinking about that. I think this is kind of an unremarkable close for options this month. I
Yeah.
think the most important thing is, having a good monthly close for both Bitcoin and Ether as far as what their charts look like.
Mm-hmm.
I would be very happy if Bitcoin, were to close above 106. That would be amazing. But even, 104, 105 would be really good.
Yeah.
And a close for Ether over 3,400 would also be a nice end to the monthly, month end. So I think those would be important. I mean, I think, if I have to say one narrative that I see people ask about and I hear about is, when is, what's going on with ETH and when is it going to, when is it going to pick up steam? And I think the other thing is, we've been in this altcoin bear market and we've seen, I think everybody expected, if we had 100,000 Bitcoin, that their altcoins would be, near all-time highs or at least close to them. And I don't think any of the major tokens are near all-time highs, for altcoins. I mean, it's certainly not Ethereum. I think Solana's still $50 away from that. And I think some of the other like top 10, top 20 tokens are far away from their all-time highs. So, it's really right now, like this Bitcoin dominance is between like 55 and 60%. We're really seeing the liquidity go into Bitcoin.
David, do when we look at that divergence between Bitcoin and broadly the altcoin market, do you see that as a healthy thing for the market?
I mean, look, it would be great if it's a more broader rally.
Yeah.
But, I mean, remember, again, that a lot of people only have access to, maybe it's just Bitcoin or maybe it's just Bitcoin or Ether,
Yep.
Through accounts that they're comfortable using. And until, we can get more people comfortable with using crypto exchanges. And again, crypto exchanges are great, but people have only been using stock, exchanges for 30 years. They don't pivot on a dime.
Right.
So I think some of that is getting dealt with, with different filings. There's a Ripple ETF filing, your favorite, a Doge ETF filing.
I think there was a Litecoin ETF filing recently.
I didn't know people were still holding. No.
I didn't know either. I don't.
No, I'm just kidding for the Litecoin folks. But I think there will be more options for people looking for them in the traditional wrappers.
Right.
But I do think that, it's my sense that we'll see some meaningful appreciation in Ethereum and the altcoins in the upcoming months. That's my sense.
David, let's rip up the script one last time. One of the other things you and I often talk about is, I don't want to call it the hype cycle, but you might have seen in the news recently that X is moving forward on leveraging and engaging in payments. There's the rumor mill of, what will Musk use? Will it enable Doge or others within the ecosystem? How much of that is hype and how risky is that for the market when we see those kind of prognostications about a social media platform?
Look, I really like the idea of a social media platform having a payment system. I mean, it would be nice to see people if you liked their content, that you could tip them, or if there was a way for them to directly earn a little more. I mean, on X, some people have their own subscriptions where you have to subscribe extra. And right now you're paying for it in fiat. I think it'd be kind of interesting if people could do that in crypto.
Yeah.
Look, Elon's part of the PayPal mafia. They know how to do payment systems. They know what the rules are. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he starts implementing it soon. It actually makes a lot of sense if he were to do that.
And if I remember the news correctly, they've applied for money transmitter licenses in most, if not all, of the states. I know that's, David, you probably know better than I. That's not an easy process. There's a lot of work to do, and it's kind of monotonous, but you've got to do it for all of the states you want to do business in. And I don't imagine they're doing it for nothing.
No, it's very time consuming. I've done it for several exchanges and advised companies on doing it, but it can take 9 to 12 months, sometimes longer. It's a meaningful amount of time and capital, not maybe for Elon, but for a lot of other people. But it's a bit of a painful process. But if he is doing it, I'm sure, like you said, he's doing it for a reason and not to not to add more bureaucracy in light of his new role as cutting bureaucracy.
At Doge, yes, and that's Department of Government Efficiency for everyone on the call. David, let's wrap it up as this private jet flies you in. You know me, I'm not a big sports guy generally, but as you're escorted to the owner's box, who are you wagering on for the Super Bowl?
Well, I'm still thinking about the Super Bowl. We still have another week, but I am fortunate to be on the West Coast for a few days to get a little sun out there before the Super Bowl. I will not be in New Orleans for it, but I will make some predictions next week on what I think will happen. But it's a great event. So many people get into it, and I don't know if we'll have any crypto ads this year. I don't know if this is advertising, but the last few years have been interesting to see who advertises on it. But let's see who does.
It will be interesting, and no, I will not wager you on who wins or loses the game, my friend. Those days of wagering you anything are over.
That's
David,
bad.
let's leave it there. Relatively short. We got a hard stop for 12:30 today. For everyone who did join us and everyone who's watching the recording, thank you so much for your time. David and Josh and I will be back next week. I don't think she's got Starlink on the jet, David. But as we wrap up again, if you've got questions for David or Josh or I, info@wsba.co. Please drop us a note. This recording will live on YouTube and X as well, and also on Spotify. So again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. David, always a privilege, old friend. Safe travels, and you and I will catch up soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.